Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Zabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Hello children, our Bible story for today is going to be the Mark of Cain. One day he went and he killed Abel, and then he went and buried him, and then later when Cain was walking around, God came to Cain again and said, "Cain, where is your brother Abel?" Now God knew where Abel was, but he was going to test to see if Cain would tell the truth and confess his sin. But instead of confessing his sin, Cain said, "I don't know where Abel is. Am I my brother's keeper that I should know where he is?" And then God said, "Cain, what have you done? The blood of Abel is crying out to me." So God knew what Cain had done, and he was punishing Cain. And he said, "From now on, the ground will be cursed before you. You will wander the earth, and you will not be able to eat from anything that you grow." So from now on, Cain would have to wander the earth, and he'd only be able to eat the fruit and the veggies that grew naturally in the wild. He couldn't grow his own crops anymore. He'd have to find berries and fruit trees and wild vegetables and pick them and eat them himself. He couldn't grow them anymore. And Cain said, "Behold, my punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." And then Cain said, "Whoever will find me is going to kill me." And God said, "No. I'm going to put a mark on you, Cain, and if anyone kills you, they will be punished sevenfold." Now the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what the mark of Cain was, but personally, I like to think it was a sign of the cross on Cain's forehead. And the reason I believe that is because this mark of Cain was not a punishment. The mark of Cain was God's grace upon Cain. God had punished Cain by making it so the ground could never grow food for him, that Cain could never grow crops ever again. That was Cain's punishment. The mark on Cain's head was not a punishment. That was God's mercy and God's grace upon Cain. Because Cain was afraid that because he had killed Abel, others were going to get revenge on Cain and kill him. And so Cain was afraid. And God gave him the promise that nobody could kill Cain without being punished 7 times themselves. And so this was actually God's grace and mercy towards Cain. But did Cain believe in the promise of God? Did he believe in God's protection? No. Because the Bible tells us that what Cain went and did next is he went off to the land of Nod. The word Nod in Hebrew means wandering, so it was the land of wandering. And there, Cain found a wife, which would have been either his sister or one of his nieces. And he married her, and he had children. And what did Cain do? It said that he built a very large city, and he named it after his firstborn son Enoch. And that Cain and his family and his descendants lived in that city. And the reason Cain built a big city is because he was afraid that people were going to hurt him. He was afraid that people were going to murder him. He didn't trust in God's promise to protect him. Instead, he sought to protect himself by his own hands, by his own good works. He built a big city around himself, and he had a bunch of people live in the city to protect him. And so Cain tried to protect him by his own works, which goes to show that Cain never learnt his lesson. When Cain and Abel came to do their sacrifices, Cain pridefully sacrificed his crops, thinking that he could save himself by his own good works. And when God said, "No, Cain, you're not saved by your good works, you're saved by faith." That's why God had grace and love and compassion upon Abel, because Abel had faith, whereas Cain, in pride, trusted in his own good works. And so that pride led Cain to kill his brother. And so God punished Cain by humbling him and taking away his ability to make crops, so that Cain would no longer be prideful in his own good works of crop making. And then God, in a sign of mercy and compassion, gave Cain a mark of protection, as that was God's promise that it would be God alone who would protect Cain, that Cain shouldn't trust in his own good works, but that he should trust in the Lord alone to save him. But Cain still didn't have faith. He still didn't trust in the Lord to protect him. He still didn't trust in God to save him. Instead, Cain trusted in his own ability. He trusted in his own good works. He trusted in his own power to save himself. Cain did not trust in God to save him. Cain sought to save himself by his own good works, and so he built a city to protect him from anyone who would seek to murder him, rather than trusting in the promise of God to protect him. And so, children, that was the sin of Cain. It was the sin of trusting in his own good works to save him. Cain's greatest sin is that he did not have faith in God. Yes, Cain believed that God existed. Cain talked to God all the time. But, as St. James tells us in the Bible, even the demons believe that God exists, but they shudder in fear, because the demons believe in God's existence, but they don't believe in God as the Lord and Saviour. And that was Cain's greatest sin. Cain did believe that God existed. Cain knew that God was real, but Cain did not believe in God as his Saviour. Cain trusted in his own good works for salvation. And it is sadly for that reason that Cain ended up in hell. Because, children, we are not saved by our good works. We're saved by faith alone. St. Paul tells us in his letter to the Romans that the one who works will receive his wages. And as Paul says, the wages of sin is death. Not just death in this life, but eternal death and punishment in hell. So for the one who tries to save himself by his works, he will receive his reward, and his reward is eternal punishment in hell. But as for those who have faith in God, like Abel, those who do not trust in their own good works, but trust in God to save them from their sins, they will be forgiven and they will go to heaven. Because as Paul says, we hold that a person is justified not by works, but by faith apart from works. And so, Abel, who had faith in God, got to go to heaven. And you know what, children? Abel was the first human to die. And he had faith in God, which means Abel was also the first human to ever go to heaven. And that's our story for today, children. I know this one's been a little bit longer, but that's because this is a very important story. I hope you've enjoyed this story. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.